Welcome to the Terror Time.
The first story is about the Mansion of Echoing Shadows. The night was supposed to be just another routine ghost hunting trip, a spooky adventure that would make for great content. It was pouring rain, and the rain sounds blended with the eerie quiet of the mansion as I stood at the gate, staring up at its decaying facade. This old place had been the subject of countless horror stories, and I had read enough on Reddit to know that people rarely stayed overnight. But I was determined. I had my camera, and I wanted proof. Proof that the stories about demons haunting the place were more than just local legend. As I entered the mansion, the door creaked open, as if it had been waiting for me. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and the moment I stepped inside, it felt like the mansion itself was alive. I could feel the weight of something unseen pressing against me, the kind of heaviness that makes your heart race even when there's nothing visibly wrong. The place looked like an animated horror story, with every shadow in the corner seeming to move in ways that defied reason. I turned on my flashlight and started exploring. The house was massive, its hallways long and winding, filled with doors that led to rooms I wasn't sure I wanted to enter. The walls were lined with portraits of long-dead family members, their eyes seemingly following me as I moved deeper into the mansion. Every footstep echoed unnervingly, as if the house itself was listening. As I walked down one particularly narrow hallway, I heard something, a faint whisper. At first I thought it was just the wind, but it grew louder, more distinct. I stopped, straining to listen. The whisper seemed to come from a room at the end of the hall. It was a child's voice, soft, almost inviting, but there was something creepy about it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I reached the door and hesitated. Something inside me screamed not to open it, but I was here to capture something, anything caught on camera. I pushed the door open slowly, and what I saw chilled me to my core. The room was empty, save for a single chair facing the window. And there, sitting on the chair, was a doll, old, weathered, and unsettlingly lifelike. Its glassy eyes stared straight ahead, and I swear they flicked toward me for a split second. My camera caught it all, but the footage would show nothing more than an empty, dusty room with a single, motionless doll. But I knew better. This was no ordinary haunted house. I left the room quickly, my heart pounding. The atmosphere of the mansion felt oppressive, as if it was closing in on me. I found myself struggling to breathe, as though the air had thickened. The house had a way of playing tricks on you, warping reality until you couldn't tell what was real and what was just your imagination running wild. As the night wore on, things only got worse. Every time I turned around, I caught glimpses of shadows darting across the hallways, too fast to be human. The whispers, once distant, were now everywhere, surrounding me, getting louder. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but their intent was clear. They weren't just ghosts. These were entities far darker, older. Demons, perhaps, as the story suggested. At one point, I decided to set up camp in the main hall, hoping to capture some real paranormal activity for the channel. I positioned my camera, hoping for something truly terrifying to be caught on camera, something that would make the viewers gasp and believe. But what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. As I sat there, reviewing the footage I'd captured earlier, I began to feel a sharp pain in my chest, like icy fingers were gripping my heart. The air around me grew even colder, and suddenly, the camera flickered. At first I thought it was a technical glitch, but then I saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the flickering light. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with glowing red eyes that pierced through the darkness. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze burning into me. The whispers became louder, almost deafening, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. The figure remained still, its gaze unbroken, as if it were waiting for something. My hands trembled as I reached for the camera to turn it off, but before I could, the lights went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. The only sound now was my own ragged breathing and the faint echo of the rain outside. When the lights flickered back on a moment later, the figure was gone, but the whispers remained, now closer than ever. I tried to pack up my gear and leave, but the house wasn't done with me yet. As I made my way toward the front door, something blocked my path. The shadows that had been lurking in the corners were now alive, swirling around me, moving with purpose. They pushed me back, deeper into the house, their whispers turning into shrieks. I felt cold hands grab at my arms, my legs, pulling me down. I struggled to break free, but the harder I fought, the tighter their grip became. I don't know how long I was trapped in that state, but when I finally broke free, I found myself back in the children's room. The doll was still there, but this time it wasn't alone. The figure with the red eyes stood behind it, watching me with an expressionless face. I backed away slowly, my mind racing with fear. And then the doll's head turned, its mouth opening slightly as if it was about to speak. Before it could, I ran. I don't remember how I made it out, but I didn't stop running until I was far away from the mansion. The rain pouring down on me as I gasped for air. When I finally stopped and looked back, the mansion stood silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. That night, when I reviewed the footage, I saw them. The figure with the red eyes, the shadows, and the doll. They were all there, caught on camera, undeniable proof of the mansion's horrors. But that wasn't the worst part. As I watched the footage, I noticed something chilling. In the final frame, just before the camera cuts out, I saw myself, sitting in the children's room, motionless, staring at the doll. But I had no memory of that. The second story is about the demon behind the mirror. It was a rainy night, and the sound of droplets hitting the old mansion's windows filled the silence with an eerie rhythm. The place had been abandoned for years, its dilapidated walls and rotting wood telling the horror story of time's passage. But that wasn't the scariest part of this place. No, the stories that surrounded this mansion were darker, deeper. Legends whispered about something far worse than ghosts. A demon that lingered here, trapped in the mansion's many mirrors, waiting for someone foolish enough to call it. As someone who'd been investigating haunted locations for years, I'd heard plenty of ghost stories. But demons? That was a different kind of terrifying. Still, I wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Armed with my camera, a flashlight, and enough adrenaline to keep me going through the night, I entered the mansion. The air inside was colder than I expected, like the building itself was somehow alive and aware of my presence. The first thing that struck me as I stepped into the main hallway was how still everything was. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if I'd walked into a place that didn't want me there. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet sent chills up my spine. And yet, there was an undeniable draw, a creepy, magnetic pull that kept me moving deeper into the mansion. Toward the grand room where a large, cracked mirror was said to hang. This mirror had been the subject of countless scary stories shared online, especially in places like Reddit and creepypasta forums. The legend went that anyone who stared into it for too long would catch a glimpse of something, a figure standing behind them, a dark shape with glowing red eyes. The figure was said to be a demon, one that could only be seen in reflections, waiting to claim its next victim. I turned the corner into the room where the mirror hung. It was massive, the glass old and foggy, with a large crack running down the center. I set up my camera, determined to capture whatever I could. This was it, the perfect setup for some scary videos and proof that the stories weren't just the stuff of internet lore. As I adjusted the camera, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But when I glanced around the room, there was no one there, just me and my reflection in that massive cracked mirror. The rain outside intensified, the rain sounds mixing with the low hum of wind creeping through the mansion's broken windows. I stood in front of the mirror, my flashlight flickering slightly. The air seemed to grow even colder as I stared into my own reflection, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. Nothing. I was about to turn away, convinced that it was just another paranormal hoax, when I saw it, movement in the corner of the mirror. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I looked closer, I saw a shadow, barely there but unmistakable, moving behind me in the reflection. I spun around, but the room was empty. The shadow, however, remained in the mirror, still there, standing just behind my reflection. I stepped back, my pulse quickening as the shadow moved closer to my reflected self. Its form was vague at first, but as it approached, I could make out more details. dark, elongated limbs, hollow eyes that glowed a dull red, and a face twisted in a horrifying grin. It was no ghost. This was something darker, something that felt ancient, malicious, a demon exactly as the stories had described. I reached for my camera, but my hands trembled so much that I fumbled with it. The creature in the mirror seemed to be watching me, feeding off my fear. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I stared at the reflection, my mind racing with what to do next. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the room plunged into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for my flashlight, but when the lights came back on, the figure in the mirror was gone, or so I thought. A sense of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I turned to leave the room, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the reflection again. This time, it wasn't just in the mirror, it was in the room, just behind me. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly, I turned around, and there it was, the same twisted figure from the mirror, now standing just a few feet away from me. It didn't move, but I could feel its presence, its malevolent energy pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The whispers started then, soft at first, then louder, overlapping, filling the room with unintelligible voices. My skin crawled as the figure began to move toward me, its eyes glowing brighter, its grin widening. In a moment of sheer panic, I grabbed my camera and bolted from the room, running through the dark hallways as fast as I could. The whispers followed me, echoing through the mansion, growing louder and more frantic. I could feel the demon's presence chasing me, closing in with every step I took. The mansion had become a maze, its layout warping as if the building itself was trying to trap me. I stumbled into a small room at the back of the house, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart raced as I pressed my back against the door, trying to catch my breath. The whispers stopped, but the air was still thick with tension. I looked around, realizing too late where I had ended up. The room was lined with mirrors. I was surrounded by reflections, all of them showing me, except they weren't quite right. In each mirror, my reflection was distorted, darker, with the same hollow eyes and twisted grin as the demon that had chased me. I screamed, banging on the door to get out, but it wouldn't budge. The reflections in the mirrors began to move, their twisted forms stepping closer, reaching out for me. In that moment, I realized there was no escape. The demon wasn't just in the mirror anymore. It had become part of me, twisted into my very reflection. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the sound of my own voice, distorted, laughing as the mirrors shattered around me. When I woke up, I was outside, lying in the mud as the rain poured down on me. I didn't remember how I got there, but when I checked the footage later, it showed everything. The figure in the mirror, the whispers, and me, running through the mansion like a man possessed. The final frame? Me, staring into the camera with glowing red eyes. The third story is about the demon in the attic. The old mansion had stood vacant for as long as anyone in the town could remember, its cracked windows and sagging roof giving it an appearance of inevitable collapse. Yet, no one dared to go near it, not because of the condition of the house, but because of the horror stories whispered about the attic. Stories of people who had entered only to leave changed, or worse, never leave at all. They said the house was cursed, a haunted place with a presence lurking just above, in the shadows of the attic. It was the perfect setup for one of my ghost hunting videos. A little paranormal activity caught on camera could do wonders for my channel, especially since demon sightings were a rare catch. I packed up my gear, ready to spend the night documenting the mansion's attic, where according to the tales, a demon had been seen crawling along the rafters. The plan was simple: stay overnight, get footage, and prove whether or not these scary stories had any truth to them. The rain began just as I arrived, rain sounds blending with the creak of the mansion's front door as I pushed it open. The place reeked of decay, the damp air clinging to my skin as I made my way through the ground floor. The house groaned under the weight of time, as if it was warning me to leave while I still could. But I had come for a reason, and I wasn't about to back down. I reached the staircase that led to the attic, its steps steep and narrow, disappearing into darkness. Each creak under my foot seemed louder than the last as I ascended, the weight of the mansion's creepy silence pressing down on me. At the top of the stairs was a heavy wooden door, scratched and worn. I paused for a moment, the stories about the demon flickering in my mind like nightmare horror on repeat. Then I opened the door. The attic was a vast, open space filled with old furniture covered in dust, broken mirrors, and piles of forgotten things left behind by the house's previous occupants. The air was colder here, almost unnaturally so, as if the attic itself had been frozen in time. I set up my camera in the center of the room, facing one of the large windows that overlooked the mansion's decaying gardens. The wind howled outside, and the rain continued to fall in steady sheets. As I began recording, the usual feeling of unease set in. I'd been in haunted places before, but this was different. It felt personal, like the mansion was watching me, waiting for something. I started narrating the scene, describing the old attic and the countless ghost stories I'd read about it online. I mentioned the rumors of the demon, how people had claimed to see its dark form climbing the walls or hanging from the ceiling, watching them with glowing eyes. Hours passed with nothing happening. I paced the room, checking my camera and wondering if the stories were just local legends. But then, as the clock neared midnight, things began to change. It started with the shadows. I was reviewing the footage when I noticed something moving behind me. I turned around quickly, but the room was empty. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced along the walls, but I was certain I had seen something shift in the corner. I rewound the footage, my heart pounding, and there it was, barely visible but unmistakable, a dark figure moving across the ceiling. It was caught on camera, proof that I wasn't alone. I stood frozen, listening intently. The air had grown colder still, my breath fogging up as I exhaled. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from above. My eyes darted to the ceiling beams, and there, in the dim light, I saw it. A figure, crawling along the wooden rafters, its limbs impossibly long and its face hidden in shadow. My pulse quickened as I watched the figure move silently above me, its body twisting unnaturally. I grabbed my flashlight, pointing it toward the rafters, but the moment the light touched the figure, it vanished, dissolving into the shadows. The attic was silent once more, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I could feel something watching me, something darker than any spirit I had encountered before. This wasn't a ghost. It was something older, something evil, a demon, just like the stories had said. I thought about leaving, but curiosity got the better of me. I adjusted my camera, positioning it to face the far corner of the attic where I had seen the figure. My hands shook as I continued to film, waiting for anything to happen. I didn't have to wait long. The attic door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire room. I jumped, spinning around to see if someone was there, but I was still alone. My camera picked up the sound of heavy breathing, but it wasn't mine. The scratching started again, this time louder, coming from all around me. I backed away, my eyes scanning the attic for any sign of movement, but the shadows remained still. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again. The figure. It was no longer on the ceiling. It was standing at the far end of the attic, half hidden in the darkness. My flashlight flickered as I tried to get a better look, but the light barely touched it before going out completely. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with my flashlight, trying to bring the room back into focus. When the light flickered back on, the figure was gone. But I wasn't alone. The room was filled with whispers now, low, guttural voices that overlapped, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The shadows around me seemed to shift and move, forming shapes that didn't belong. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the demon wasn't just a figure in the attic, it was everywhere. It was the shadows, the whispers, the very air I was breathing. The mansion wasn't just haunted, it was possessed by something far worse. Suddenly, the attic window shattered, sending shards of glass across the floor. I stumbled back, my camera falling to the ground. That's when I saw it, clearly for the first time. The demon stood before me, its form towering over the attic. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, and its twisted grin sent shivers down my spine. It didn't move toward me, but I could feel its presence pulling me in, as if it wanted me to stay, to become part of the mansion's dark history. I ran. I didn't care about the footage, the camera, or the stories. I just needed to get out. The attic door wouldn't budge at first. But after what felt like an eternity, I managed to force it open. I raced down the stairs, the whispers and shadows following me, growing louder, more frantic. The house groaned as if it was alive, angry that I was leaving. I burst through the front door and into the rain, gasping for air. The mansion loomed behind me, dark and silent, but I could still feel it watching me. The demon wasn't just a figure in the attic, it had become part of the house, and it wasn't going to let me forget. Later, when I reviewed the footage, I saw everything. The figure crawling along the rafters, the shadows moving, and in the final frame, the demon standing just behind me, grinning as I fled. It was undeniable proof that something dark lived in that mansion, something that wouldn't stop until it claimed another victim.